Tonight, searching for answers. What sparked the deadliest wildfire in U.S. modern history? The rising death toll as relief workers sift through the wreckage in Maui. Plus, 2 years since the fall of Kabul, the plight of some 75,000 Afghan refugees in the U.S. And drone warfare.
It is no secret what our adversaries are doing with these things.
How the U.S. is meeting one of the top threats in military combat. All this and more tonight on Faith Nation. A search for understanding in the aftermath of Maui's unthinkable disaster. Good evening in Washington. I'm Caitlin Burke. John and Jenna have the evening off. People in Lahaina want answers as the death count rises following devastating wildfires there. Maui officials confirm at least 111 people have died, with many still missing. Tonight, more is being learned about what may have started the fires. Hillary Powell joins me now with our top story. Hillary, what do we know about the recovery efforts?
Well, Caitlin, the search continues for more than 1,000 people unaccounted for in the burned out areas. In the grim task of identifying victims, officials are actually having to rely on fingerprints and DNA obtained from human remains and from family members. There's also renewed focus on the hours before the fatal fire began, what could have sparked it, and whether all communities are getting equal aid.
Amid rows of wreckage, crews rely on cadaver dogs to scour the rubble on Maui to help bring closure to those who survived the nation's deadliest fire in more than a century. In the decimated town of Lahaina, police are asking for privacy for the families during the search for the victims. People forced to evacuate can only survey the damage from a distance and point to places that are no more and recall how they survived.
The time that I heard that people are lying on the road, they're dead. People are jumping on the water, on the ocean, just to survive.
This surveillance video from the Maui Bird Conservation Center shows a spark, then flash, followed by a down power line. Watching how the flames spread, also sparking questions about whether down power lines ignited the initial fire. While officials maintain they issued alerts via text message, TV, and radio, those messages couldn't get through when the power went out. The head of the island's emergency agency adding he has no regret over the decision to not sound warning sirens during the fast-moving fires.
Do you regret not sounding the sirens?
I do not. I should also note that there are no sirens Mauka or on the mountainside where the fire was spreading down. So even if we sounded the siren, it would not have saved those people on the mountainside.
Holding signs asking why no sirens and expressing concerns of inequity, Native Hawaiians are leading grassroots relief efforts, saying the government is lagging.
They just don't even have any roots here. It's got to this point where it's like, who are these people watching us? Or do they even properly care for us?
White House officials say the federal family is on the way. President Joe Biden and First Lady Jill are set to travel to Maui on Monday. They're expected to meet with first responders and survivors. Meanwhile, this disaster has created a huge housing shortage on Maui. The Small Business Association is already approving home loans to help.
For more, let's turn to Pastor Gabe Velasquez, pastor of advancement at Harvest Christian Fellowship in Maui. Gabe, first of all, what's the general atmosphere in Maui right now? Have people had time to process through everything yet?
I think they're going to be processing for a while, Caitlin. Just the devastation. It's been just over a week now, and we've talked to hundreds of people and been around the island, literally when you come in from the airport, from Kahului all the way down to Lahaina town. It's almost that shock and awe moment, and people they're desperate. You know, they're desperate, and what we're here for is to give them Jesus and to give them hope and to kind of guide them in the next steps of what to do of rebuilding.
As a pastor, how do you help someone understand such an unthinkable disaster?
Well, there's not a lot you can do besides really show them the love of Jesus. You know, we don't know why things happen. But the Lord said in Jeremiah 29:11 says, "For I know the thoughts I think towards you, says the Lord, thoughts of peace and not of evil, to give you a future and a hope." And our desire here is to give them hope. Pastor Greg says it all the time. He says, hope has a name, and his name is Jesus. And that's what we want to do here, is to give them the love of Jesus, because without him, without having that anchor for your soul, people will be floundering, even through the process of cleanup and getting their lives going. Our desire here is to feed them spiritually, physically, to give them everything that we can to just show the love of Jesus to them.
Being there on the ground, what are you hearing is the greatest need right now? And how are you and your church leaning into that?
The greatest need right now is really finding homes and shelter for people. There's so many organizations around right now, but Harvest Church in Orange County and Riverside, and as well as here in Kumulani, we're doing everything we can to put people on the ground to help those who are in need. And the biggest thing is finding shelter. We've got guys here all over the church who are in the hotel business and the real estate business, and we're doing everything we can to lead them to those guys. And there's a lot of smart people around here. A lot of people right now who are in shock aren't realizing the next steps of insurance and all that stuff. And we got people here that are helping them do everything that we can to get them going. It's a hard process. And when you see this town and you see it, I mean, you guys have seen it from pictures and videos, but when you're down here, it's different. When you talk to the people, everything comes back, and we've had some amazing ministry opportunities here. And some of them, it's crazy to think, but a friend of mine owns the Round Table Pizzas here, and we've been going down there. We've given free pizzas out all day long. People are coming in and getting a warm meal. And the blessing of that is not only feeding them, but to hear their stories. And we've prayed with hundreds of people down there. And there's relief efforts going all over the place. But Harvest Church, we're doing everything that we can to go into the highways and byways to meet people, to help them and to give them hope. And that hope is Jesus. And not to sound cliche in the church world, but that's our hope. That's our anchor. And without him, there is no hope. And our desire is to give them that.
All right. Pastor Gabe Velasquez, thank you so much for taking the time to come on.
Yeah. God bless you guys.
You too. To the economy, Federal Reserve concern over the pace of inflation could signal more interest rate hikes to come. Some economists believe the Fed's July uptake would be the last in this cycle, but newly released meeting minutes from last month show discussions suggesting unless economic conditions change, more rate hikes will be needed. One area of the economy that doesn't seem to be changing soon, the strong jobs market. Labor Department numbers out today show new unemployment applications down 11,000 last week to 239,000. The drop thought to indicate fewer layoffs. With that, let's bring in Mark Hamrick, Washington Bureau Chief and Senior Economic Analyst for Bankrate. Mark, it sounds like the persistent high inflation could once again mean rate hikes. Is this strategy working?
Well, let's take a pause and maybe a deep breath for a second, Caitlin. Those meeting minutes are important, and we do pore over them to the extent that they can give us any additional insights into the most recent meeting. But Chairman Powell was quite straightforward at his most recent news conference, which obviously follows that most recent announcement, to say there is a lot of data before we get to that September 20th meeting where the next decision will be announced. And among the data points that are still due are a monthly employment report, another iteration of the consumer price index, and one more producer price index. So while financial markets might have taken this badly to some degree, meaning the minutes, maybe taking a worst case scenario approach to it, there is a lot still to happen before we get to that meeting. The reality is that inflation has come down from the peak, but it's a bumpy road. We saw the CPI at 3% year over year, and then in the most recent reading for July, 3.2%. So we're making progress, but for consumers, for businesses, and for central bankers, not the progress that we would like to see to essentially check that box and say mission accomplished.
Now, if inflation is still high at that next meeting and they decide that we do need another rate hike, can the uncertain economy handle that?
Well, that remains to be seen, and that really is a good question, Caitlin, because if the Fed does go too far, then the economy could tip into recession. And one of the things to think about here, even though it's a bit technical, but it's important, is that as inflation comes down, with the Fed having boosted its benchmark rate now to essentially 5.375%, that's well above the rate of inflation now. And so if inflation does continue to come down, that means the so-called real rate, or adjusted for inflation, is actually taking more of a tightening effect on the economy. There also is a lag in terms of the impacts of high interest rates that is central bankers refer to as long and variable lags. It's another way of saying that it takes a long way for this medicine to actually affect all aspects of the economy. So right now the bet is that the Fed does not raise rates on September 20th, but we've got a long way to go. But I think that it would be less than prudent to say that the Fed will absolutely not raise rates between now and the end of the year, because as we've all seen, inflation has proven stickier, the economy has proven more resilient, and right now there is one forecast from the Atlanta Federal Reserve that suggests that annualized GDP in the current quarter is coming in with an estimate right now of about 6%. So that's quite remarkable and higher than what most private economists are believing. And we'll see whether that comes to pass. I would doubt it at this point.
In the last few seconds, are there any other factors out there helping to ease inflation? Are supply chains finally normalizing out?
That's a very good point. And so we're seeing more automobile supply, for example, coming. As we know, building capacity with semiconductors, that shortage of computer chips takes a long time to resolve. And what's really not helping us right now is this recent bump back up in gasoline prices.
All right, Mark Hamrick with Bankrate. Thanks so much for coming on.
Thank you, Caitlin.
2 years since the Taliban takeover. When we come back, how Christians around the world are offering support to the people of Afghanistan. In 2020, the U.S. chaotically withdrew from Afghanistan, leading to the fall of Kabul. For 2 years, the Taliban has controlled the lives of Afghans. There are now some 75,000 Afghan refugees in the U.S., many stuck in legal limbo. They face an uncertain future without permanent status here and fear having to return to a Taliban-controlled Afghanistan. Now Christians are stepping up to help. New polling from National Immigration Forum finds 2/3 of evangelicals support the bipartisan Afghan Adjustment Act, which would grant tens of thousands of Afghan refugees permanent legal status and eventual citizenship. Matt Sorens is the Vice President of Advocacy and Policy at World Relief. They participated in that polling with the National Immigration Forum. Matt, how important is that evangelical support when it comes to getting a bill like this through Congress?
Yeah, I think it's so important that evangelical Christians played just an integral role in welcoming Afghans as they arrived beginning 2 years ago. And now that they're ensuring that we really finish that mission, that we have, as a country, welcomed these people as we should. They were, in so many cases, allies of our military in Afghanistan. We made a commitment to them that we need to keep. But now we need to finish that as a country, because we call them refugees, but technically the Afghans who came have a status that's parole. They're not technically refugees, and the effect of that legally is they've got an expiration date on their legal documents. And if we don't want them to live with the fear of potentially being sent back to Afghanistan or just losing their work authorization, not being able to provide for their families, it's really important that Congress passed this Afghan Adjustment Act. And I really believe that evangelical Christians are playing an essential role, along with veterans groups and others, in urging Congress on both sides of the aisle to move forward on the Afghan Adjustment Act.
So if their legal status doesn't move forward, they could actually be forced to return to Afghanistan?
I mean, theoretically, at least, I don't think our country would do that. I think it would be absurd, frankly, for our government, our military, to have at significant cost brought them here after they've served alongside the U.S. military and in other ways, and then send them back. But they could, at the very least, become undocumented, lose valid legal status in the United States if at some point in the future. Right now, they have this temporary parole that the current administration has renewed, which is better than not renewing it, but would be much, much better, but would require an act of Congress, is to give them permanent legal status, which is usually how the U.S. treats refugees who are resettled in the United States. Usually refugees are allowed to apply for their permanent status 1 year after arrival and pursue naturalization 4 years after that if they meet all the requirements. Because of the very unique nature of the evacuation 2 years ago this week, Afghans didn't come in with that formal refugee status. They have parole, and it leaves them in a lot of limbo unless Congress takes action by passing the Afghan Adjustment Act.
What do you make of the bipartisan support around the bill, which is pretty rare these days?
Yeah, for me, it's a breath of fresh air. I mean, you have this bill that's supported by roughly 7 in 10 evangelical Christians, but also, large majorities of both Republicans and Democrats on both sides of the political aisle. And you see that in the co-sponsorship of this bill as well, which has been duly led by Republicans and Democrats working together, which, as you said, is not something we hear in the news very often right now. It's actually a really hopeful point, I think, and I actually hope it's a preface where we could see Congress working together on a bipartisan basis on some other priorities around immigration that are important to evangelical Christians, like a permanent solution for dreamers, who are these younger immigrants brought as children many years ago, in some cases, who are in a very similar circumstance and really want to be able to be permanent members of the society.
All right, Matt Sorens with World Relief, thank you so much for coming on.
Yeah, thank you for having us.
Coming up, the future takes flight. How drones are changing the game both on and off the battlefield. Welcome back. Modern warfare is seeing a rise in modern weapons. Many military leaders say small drones are one of the top threats in combat. CBN's Mark Martin traveled to Grand Forks Air Force Base in North Dakota to find out how the U.S. is meeting that challenge.
Russia's war on Ukraine is bringing drone warfare front and center, showcasing how these unmanned aerial vehicles are used for surveillance and combat. This footage, reportedly released by Ukrainian special forces, appears to show a drone destroying a Russian armored vehicle and tank. Then there's actually drone-on-drone combat. This video depicts a drone dogfight, reportedly involving equipment used for surveillance by Ukrainian and Russian armed forces.
There's very little protection in the way of anti-drone measures.
And it's not just in the air. Here you see what appears to be a Ukrainian sea drone attacking a Russian tanker ship in the Black Sea. At North Dakota's Grand Forks Air Force Base, they're not taking the use of drones lightly. The 319th Reconnaissance Wing's small UAS program is the first in Air Combat Command to utilize such a program with operators from multiple units.
You don't have to go far to go look at what's happening around the world. Right, it is no secret what our adversaries are doing with these things.
Captain Matthew Kroll is the vice chairman for Small Unmanned Aerial Systems operations here.
These things can be weaponized and they can be used to hurt people and things. And unfortunately, what that means is we, as the Department of Defense and the United States Air Force, have to go out there and counter that threat.
One drone that airmen train on is the quadcopter-style Skydio X2D. The Security Forces unit employs it to defend the base through perimeter scans or identifying threats from the sky. That use can also transfer to overseas bases.
That goes even beyond into the deployed missions that we serve, where our commanders are constantly under threat from the outside of the wire threat. Those threats are immediately answered by this type of technology.
Senior Airman Tavi Efron operates the drone and says it's pretty impressive what they can do.
For instance, maybe active shooters. There's something locating an individual in that aspect to get eyes on so somebody else who is in part of that mission control can see what's going on and maybe redirect us in ways that we didn't think on the ground could be done.
Kroll says they also use it for aircraft recovery training and, if required, could fly it to survey a crash site.
You would see whatever the camera sees on the aircraft itself.
Members of the aircraft maintenance unit gave us a demo of the Skydio X2D.
So I'm going to get a little bit of altitude here to get away from things. Change over to my waypoint mission. And then I'll just hit play, and then the aircraft does what it's already told to do.
Master Sergeant Matthew Roberts says using a system like this to survey and assess damages saves time, money, and resources.
It eliminates a lot of boots on the ground, in a sense, to do what we need to in a short time and capture what we need to without spending a lot of resources ahead of time to make the job and the mission happen quickly and safely.
There are actually 2 active duty military missions involving unmanned aerial systems operating here at Grand Forks Air Force Base. In addition to the Skydio, which you already saw, another unit operates what's called the RQ-4, or Global Hawk. You're looking at the world's largest drone. The 348th Reconnaissance Squadron here flies the Global Hawk. The long-endurance aircraft can reach extremely high altitudes of 50 to 60,000 feet. Captain Mark Cochran remotely pilots the large-scale system that provides global day or night intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance.
The RQ-4 Global Hawk is a premier intelligence asset that is one of the only assets that's capable of giving such a long collection time without needing aerial refueling. And I feel like that's its biggest bring to any kind of AOR or combatant commander.
Brad Bowman of the Foundation for Defense of Democracies calls these drone systems fundamentally important to the U.S. military.
We really are, unfortunately, continue to be in an arms race against adversaries that are building drones. Obviously, Russia has drones. They're working with Iran on their drones. China is a major developer and exporter of drones. The country that has the most advanced drones, the right quantity of drones and employs them effectively, it's going to have life and death consequences on the battlefield.
And airmen at the Grand Forks Air Force Base are fully aware, describing this tech as a game changer in a time of war and another way Americans can feel safe. Mark Martin, CBN News, Grand Forks, North Dakota.
Using a passion for hair to help the homeless. A story of hope next on Faith Nation. Finally tonight, summer break is a great time for teens to make some extra cash. But for a 19-year-old barber in Memphis, Tennessee, it's an even better time to give back. Darnell Wells takes his skills with scissors to the streets, giving out free haircuts to the homeless. And he's not just offering trims. He comes with burgers in hand and a message of hope. Darnell says God laid it upon his heart to help people, and he's hoping these acts of kindness inspire others to give back too. Sounds like a great way to spend the summer. That's going to do it for Faith Nation tonight. We will see you tomorrow.